Hey guys, welcome back to an interesting Winter Wild Rift. So there, before we go into any more of our updated guides and any more of our ADC videos or even other roles, we're gonna of course cover the tier list for patch 5.0. So of course 5.0 has brought a lot of changes, but mainly the biggest changes are gonna be the addition of uh, items like Heartsteel, and also not really a change to the game, but my opinion also, especially for bot lane, is also or yeah, bot lane is a little bit swayed by my experience in Korea. But of course, we're gonna first talk about the barrel lane, where I think that there is going to be the most discussion of, because that's what affects what changes has happened the most. So of course, we have the addition of Heartsteel, Titanic Hydra, and Spear of Sojin. I haven't actually seen anyone build Spear of Sojin. I believe the item is bugged at the moment, doesn't work as intended. But Heartsteel and Titanic Hydra are really popular items. Although I do think Titanic Hydra is not a good item after its huge nerf, being able to proc only once every 2.5 seconds, probably to prevent ADCs from building it. But anyways, so Heartsteel is the main factor that has come into play. So basically, there is a game of scissors, paper, and stone between Heartsteel users, Divine Syndra users, and the rest. So essentially, Heartsteel Heartsteel users are going to beat basically anyone who's not a Divine Syndra user, basically beat the rest, but they're gonna lose to Divine Syndra users, because obviously Divine Syndra users do health, max health damage, so obviously they are going to be able to destroy the Heartsteel users. The rest is kind of a little bit too general of a term, so they don't necessarily beat the Divine Syndra users, but generally they're going to be in quite a good spot against the Divine Syndra users, whereas of course the Divine Syndra users will beat the Heartsteel users, and the Heartsteel users will beat the rest. So it's sort of a kind of a little bit of a game of rock, paper, scissors here. So personally, I think the best Baron lane champion at the moment is Set, and the reason why that is the case is because he can of course build Heartsteel. He kind of counters the meta because his ulti does damage based on your opponent's max health. So if you're facing another Heartsteel user or another champion that has a lot of health, you can technically use the health they have against them to deal more damage to them as well as their team. And also, as a fighter, you're a lot more kind of independent, and you can of course carry your team to victory. Now I have gotten hard carried by both a Set and a Sion before in games that I was feeding, and those have influenced my opinion a lot, because I was feeding really hard, and the Set and Sion were just unkillable with Heartsteel. I literally saw a Set full tank, a full 5-man team, and he killed like 2 or 3 of them, and the rest started to run away. And I just thought that was way too busted to not be like, the top tier. So Sion is a similar story. I've seen basically the same thing. Like I've seen Sion tanking a whole 5-man squad. Of course, you have an inting Sion strategy. I'm not going to talk too much about that, because that is sort of influenced by having to having an account with a very like poor KDA and stuff, and it's generally not very reproducible in just any account. But Sion in general as a champion, he is an insane split pusher. Of course, he stacks health with his W passive. With Heartsteel, he stacks even more health, and of course you can still get Hullbreaker. So basically, when you get like Heartsteel and Hullbreaker, you come to a point where you're basically unkillable. So you can just ignore enemies, just attack towers, get towers, and just, if the situation calls for it, join your team and be a tank for them. So really hard to play against a Sion. Of course, the two exceptions are, number one, if you're playing Set and you can use Sion's health against him, or number two, again, if you're a Divine Syndra user, you can of course try to deal with Sion. So now Garen is not exactly a Heartsteel user. He can go for Heartsteel, but I think he's still really easy to play, really tanky, and I think he can go for the Heartsteel like second item after Black Cleaver. He couldn't even go Heartsteel first item, but I don't see him as a traditional Heartsteel user. Even so, he is still really strong and really tanky. Next up we have Gwen. So Gwen is sort of the counter to, she's not a Divine Syndra user, but she does do true damage. So she is sort of the counter to the tanks, of course. And when tanks are good, Gwen is going to be good, because tanks cannot really kill Gwen, whereas Gwen can then easily farm up, get like maybe 2 items. She gets like her Nash's Tooth, she gets her Riftmaker, and she starts, shredding tanks. So she kind of counters this meta. So next up in the S tier, you basically have the Divine Syndra users, and you have the Heartsteel users who are not as good as the S plus Heartsteel users. So first up we have Ornn. He doesn't build Heartsteel, but he's still an amazing tank. Really good utility, really good CC. Wukong again hasn't gotten his mini rework yet, but again still very good utility, really good team fight ability. Renekton is sort of an interesting one. So Renekton is, he doesn't build Divine Sunder. He's not a Heartsteel user. However, he is a very strong lane bully. So what you can do with Renekton is you can get an early lead in game and make the Heartsteel users and sometimes even the Divine Sunder users useless. So if you are able to get like 1 or 2 kills early against like a Set, a Sion, a Garen, or like one of the Divine Sunder users like Fiora or Camille, then you can actually get ahead and you can basically negate their impact. So that's why he's there. Camille and Fiora are basically very strong Divine Sunder users. They also have true damage, Fiora from her passive and Camille from her Q, so they are really strong in terms of countering the Heartsteel users and really strong split pushers as well. Jax also sort of the same deal, Divine Sunder user, really strong. And then you just have a couple of strong champions like Aatrox and Riven are just really strong picks. Then you have Mundo and Shen, who are Heartsteel users, but they're just not as good as like Sion and Set. And the main reason for that is Mundo can get to a point where he has so much health and resistances he's unkillable. But at the end of the day, that's not really very important if your team is useless. So if you are fed and if you're super tanky, but your whole other 4 members are feeding, you can't really win the game. Whereas on Set or on Sion, you can sort of try to do something to win the game. Sion, you can split push, and Set, you can actually team fight and, you know, win fights for your team. Whereas on Mundo, you can't really 1v9 and win fights for your team. All you can do is to tank damage. But if the enemy team is so ahead that even no matter how much damage you tank, you can't kill them, or your team can't kill them, then it doesn't really matter. But of course, in situations where your team is doing well and you're a super tanky, you can be the reason your team wins fights because you're unkillable. So he's really good, but just not like top tier. So Shen is kind of not really similar, but Shen is a little bit different. Like, he is sort of more towards the fighter, a little bit less of a tank, and he of course has that global ultimate to save people on your team. But once again, this makes you really reliant on your team and not just on yourself. He can of course, he should of course build Heartsteel as his first item. And he also can use Titanic Hydra, which solves his wave clear issues. So he also benefits a lot from having Titanic Hydra, but again, he's just not as good as the other Heartsteel users. Now, Malphite is just a really good tank in general, easy to pull off, good team fight, you know, with his ult. And then we of course have Volibear, another good Heartsteel user, but again, I think just not as good as the other Heartsteel users. Now we have Darius, which is a pretty interesting one, and the main reason why Darius is here is because he sort of doesn't really counter tanks, but he works well against tanks, because if you're up against a tanky target who can't really do too much damage to you, so for example, maybe not a Set, but maybe a Sion or a Mundo, you can free stack your stacks onto them, and this allows you to then apply stacks to other members of their team. So if you can, for example, full stack on a Mundo, you apply the stacks to other team members and you ult them, then you can basically kill the Mundo's entire team while Mundo is still alive. It doesn't matter if his team is dead, so he kind of works well against tanks in that sense. So next up, we have a lot of the more carry-oriented top laners. Of course, we have the Jace, the Akali, the Vladimir, Yone, etc. And they really don't do well against this tank meta, simply because like Akali can't really kill a tank. I mean, she can of course, but it's really difficult. Like, the matchups are really difficult for the carry top laners unless they get like 1 or 2 kills early on, and then they could kind of change the complexion of the matchup. But aside from that, they are kind of not so good because you're against tanks, so it's not really very good. An interesting one that I moved up one tier is Vayne. So of course, Vayne is someone who is really good against tanks. So the only reason why Vayne is like up one tier is just because she's so good against these tanks. Like, she is really good against, of course, Set, Sion, Garen, Ornn, and like all of these champions, Mundo, etc. So she actually is simply just good now because of the tank meta in the top lane. So Vayne does move up a little bit. But the rest of the Baron lane tier list pretty much remains the same, so now we're going to talk about the jungle. Okay, so honestly, in majority of the other roles, not too much has really changed. You can see jungle top tier is still the same. I've reordered it a bit because I think Lee Sin, Kha'Zix is actually a little bit better than Kayn. Evelynn is still there, and Hecarim is still there. Obviously, now you're not going to find like tanks so prevalent in other lanes except top. So now top lane is mostly just a 1v1 lane between the tanks, or like between all of them. Junglers tend to gank other lanes more so than the top lane nowadays. Like, you tend to gank mid or bot more because it's really hard to kill the tanks tanks in the top lane. Of course, you still have Gwen in the S tier, who is a tank counter, who of course will be good whenever there's a kind of tanky meta. Really, kind of everything else really kind of stays the same. Xin did get a little bit stronger after his buff, but I still don't think he's really that good compared to a lot of the other counterparts. And Fiddlesticks, after he got the nerfs after his initial few updates, really isn't all that good anymore. He was just broken because his numbers were really high, and now that they aren't anymore, he's really not not too good. Of course, we still have some kind of placement changes, a little bit of placement changes, like Jax moving up, of course, because again, he works really well against tanks and he scales up pretty well, but his jungle clear is still pretty trash. Gang's not the best. And we have Neela moving down from the S tier. And the main reason for this is, as I tested in Korea, her jungle clear is really, really bad. Like when you finish like 4 jungle camps, the enemy jungler could have already have full cleared your jungle. So you are sort of at a disadvantage, but it's really not as bad as like Twitch, for example. What I mean by this is Neela can just full farm the jungle, and you can just scale up. When you get to 2-3 items, you're still going to be an amazing carry, and to a certain extent the jungle role is still safer for Neela because she gets kind of attacked a lot less than in lane, so you kind of get free scaling as long as you don't get perma invaded, which doesn't happen all that often in Wild Rift anyways. So it still kind of works, but it's just not amazing anymore. Speaking of which, Twitch is in the tier below. His jungle clear is absolutely horrendous. He's now just a very, very cheesy pick. Can't really clear the jungle. Has to sort of rely on those invisibility ganks. But most people are now, smart enough to use control wards against Twitch. So really hard to pull off a good Twitch. Now we've moved up, of course, the Heartsteel users, Mundo and as well as the Shen. Now Shen's clear is actually pretty good, but again, you're very team reliant, and Mundo also very, very team reliant. His clear is not as good, and his ganks are kind of really bad because of course you don't really have a hard CC. But of course, once again, with Mundo, if your team is doing well and if you get tanky, you're unkillable and you can win the game for your team. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the jungle. Now we're going to talk about the mid lane. Once again, the mid lane, really not a lot of changes. Now, of course, we have a few things to talk about. The first one being Syndra. So Syndra, in my opinion, completely busted. I played like one game on Syndra and I could one-shot someone with just a basic combo and without even using my ultimate, which is a surefire sign that she's completely OP in terms of numbers. Like a QWEQ is going to instantly kill someone if you are fed, and I think that's a problem because I think at minimum you need to one-shot someone, and the fact you can one-shot someone without your ulti is bonkers, and she's just really, really strong. Of course, in the early game, she's not that strong. She's decent, not even weak really. She's actually pretty alright. And in the mid and late game, when she gets items, she just one-shots everyone. It's just insane. The rest of the S plus tier is still the same. Yasuo and Yone still incredibly strong. Vladimir is still incredible scaler, and the assassins like Zed, Akali, and to a lesser extent Zoe, kind of assassin because you kind of one-shot people as well. Just really, really strong. And of course, in the S tier, also, again, all really, really strong picks, mostly just mages. Ziggs did get his rework, and I honestly think it doesn't really change Ziggs really all that much. The main change, honestly, I think is his ultimate. His ultimate is a lot easier to land, which then makes him a lot stronger. And of course, in our last tier list, we didn't actually talk about Zyra because she wasn't actually released yet. And so Zyra is pretty alright. Like her early game is honestly pretty weak. Her plans now are really weak in the early game because of the nerfs that they gave to her plan. So the plans can basically get one shot in the early levels, but later on you need to like 2 or 3 shot the plans, which then makes it a lot stronger. And of course, when you get items, she becomes really strong. But I honestly don't think she's like top tier. She is pretty good. She's still in the S tier, but she's just not like completely busted. And of course, the next notable change that we need to talk about is Aurelion Sol. Now you can see that despite his rework, Aurelion Sol hasn't actually changed positions at all. Now this is because I think the Aurelion Sol, like the new Aurelion Sol, is, honestly might be worse than the old Aurelion Sol. Like his damage is not great. He needs to be close to do DPS, which makes him, again, very, very vulnerable to just dying. And he takes super duper long on the scale. Like he's useless like for like half of the game. It's almost like as if he's Kale. Like he does no damage in the early game. He's just trying to farm and get stacks. He does like no damage in the mid game. He's still trying to farm and get stacks, and he only really does damage in the late game, sort of like Kale. And by which time the game is probably already determined. Like you probably already won or lost the game based off of your other lanes. So he is kind of really trash at the moment, and that's just from my experience. I see him in actually quite a lot of matches because he's not really permabanned unlike Syndra, and even Zyra to a certain extent, which kind of just proves that he really isn't that strong. And of course, a lot of the player base can't really play him properly yet, so that could be part of the reason, but we'll have to kind of see if, he gets any buffs, or if people start getting better at playing him, or if there are like new builds discovered and things like that. But for now, he's really, really weak. So I'm going to talk about my most exciting part, which is going to be ADC. Okay, so now ADC is a really interesting one, because honestly, if I were to rank ADCs based on like the career server, like my ranking is going to be completely different. Like my S plus tier is going to be like something like Caitlyn, and Sivir, and then my S tier is gonna be something like Varus, Misfortune, and like Ashe and things like that. Because in the Korean server, the way people play the game is very different. So they basically play the lane for fights and play the lane for lane parties. If you're not playing like something like Caitlyn, who you see in like every game, you're gonna be at a major disadvantage in the game. So either play Caitlyn to get massive damage and like win lane, or you play like champions like Sivir or Jinx to clear up the lane and ensure you have lane parity. And aside from that, of course, really strong early game champions are champions like Misfortune, who of course has her double up and is really easy to execute, or even champions like Ashe, who has really long range and is sort of like a discount Caitlyn, and Varus as well, really strong lane bully. So basically, this tier list is of course not really based on the Korea meta, because the Korea meta is just fighting non-stop, which is not really the case in every server. So this is more of a general. I've seen 0 games of Tristana ADC in Korea, like 1 game of Ezreal ADC, and like maybe 2 to 3 games of Kai'Sa. So they really aren't very popular in Korea, but I think in general, like if outside of Korea, Kai'Sa, Tristana are like really good because they're not really the strongest in the early game. Honestly, Tristana isn't even that bad in the early game, and Ezreal's actually pretty good in the early game as well, because of Kraken Slayer. But they all scale very, very well in the late game, and they become really, really fat hyper carries. So in the S tier, of course, we still have, honestly, it's pretty much the same. Jinx, really strong hyper carry. Caitlyn and Xayah are a bit less of hyper carries, but they have their own strength. Xayah has the safety, and Caitlyn has the range and the ability to bully people in lane. Of course, we have Jhin, who's just really strong in terms of damage all around. A lot of utility as well with the traps and the slows and the roots. And Sivir, of course, really strong team fighter, and of course, really strong wave clear. And then, of course, in the next tier, we have we have Zeri, who's a little bit of an inferior hyper carry, in my opinion, to the top tier ones. And Ashe, of course, surprisingly does do pretty well now. And then we have the Feast or Famine champions, Draven and Samira. And now, honestly, I move Lucian and Vayne up, because after playing Lucian, I do think that he's actually not that bad. And he, after getting multiple buffs and his items getting multiple buffs, he's actually not too bad now. And Vayne, because of the tank meta, is actually a lot better now, just because of circumstances. But I've moved Twitch down because I think Twitch is really not that good now. Like, he's way too squishy, and he does do a lot of damage, but a lot of other ADCs above him can do similar damage, but they're just not as squishy as Twitch. So yeah, also another thing I wanted to just include in this video is my plan for releasing guides for all of these champions. Now honestly, after the changes in patch 5.0, there honestly are not really very much changes to ADC builds, so I'm not really going to update a lot of the complete guides, because a lot of the latest videos that I release are still relevant. So I'm not going to do like a Kai'Sa video, Tristana video, or Ezreal video, but I am going to update some champions, which, as you guys already saw, we already did Nyla and we already did Jhin. I'm definitely going to be doing Jinx, because I do think her build has changed. I'm going to be doing some other champions as well. But maybe supplementary guides, like maybe champions like Zeri, Vayne, for example. I'm going to be updating Lucian, Draven as well. And yeah, that's like some of the champions I have planned, but of course it's not really set in stone. But just to give you guys a heads up, that I'm not going to be updating a lot of the guides, and you guys should still be checking out the guides I did in patch like 4.4 or 4.3, because those are still the latest build for a majority of the champions. So with that said, let's now move on to talking about support. So now support is mainly a lot of change in perception on my part, and it's also a very influenced by a lot of things I saw in Korea. So now in Korea, Lux is the most popular support. Like, you see Caitlyn Lux every single game, and even if Lux is not paired with Caitlyn, Lux is basically in every single game. Caitlyn is basically in every single game. And the reason why Lux is really good, especially there, is because as you guys know, when Lux got her mini rework, her Q can now move through minions, so it's really easy or easier to hit roots. And in the career server, like, I'm not even joking, the moment you get hit by a Lux root, you're kind of just dead. So basically they just need one like small CC from the Lux root and they're gonna follow up and they're gonna kill you. So in career, Lux is really OP. Like, you get hit by a root, you get full comboed by the Lux with or without ultimate, and the ADC is going to instantly follow up, and you're just dead instantly. So you really have to get good at dodging Lux roots. If not, you're just going to die on repeat. So I actually think Lux is really strong, and this is very reproducible in other servers as well. Just that I feel that ADCs are just not as good at following up in other servers, which is kind of why Lux just doesn't appear as good. Now, Karma is someone that I think everyone has underrated, not everyone, but a lot of people have underrated a lot, because after she got in so many rounds of nerfs, people started thinking she was weak, but in reality, she's now regaining a little bit of popularity, and she's still really strong. Like, with like Luden's Echo, one Q is going to do like half of your HP as an ADC or as a support, unless you are a tank, of course. She's just really strong, honestly. She has like a combo that's like inescapable. Like, if you use your empowered W into, of course, your E to prevent the chain from breaking, it into your ult and your Q, something like that, it's really like just unavoidable, because you're gonna get rooted by the W, you're gonna get CC'd by the ult, and you're gonna land a guaranteed Q. And yeah, it's just unavoidable damage, and your team can finish the rest. And yeah, it's just, you can't really do a lot, not a lot of counterplay. Really strong early game, mid game, and late game. Shielding really good, utility really good. Not too much else to say. Now, of course, then we have Pyke, who, of course, once again, if you get hooked in, you're pretty much just dead, and it's just one of those champions. Like, Pyke is definitely the best hook champion out of all of them, because you grab them into your team and you yourself can actually do the killing. Whereas other champions like Blitzcrank, if you hook them in and your team doesn't follow up, you can actually kill them alone. Pyke, you can't do that in the early game, but in like the mid game, if you have like some items, you can actually hook someone in and you can kill them by yourself, which is pretty busted. And yeah, Pyke is just really strong. So the Enchanter supports that are really strong are like Soraka, Yuumi, Lulu, and Nami, of course. All of them are Enchanters, but they differ slightly. Of course, Yuumi and Soraka are more focused on healing, Lulu is like on shielding, and Nami's a little bit more aggressive, and things like that. So, of course, we have the best engaged support, in my opinion, is Rakan, who can build AP or can build like tank as well. Senna, of course, is really good. I do plan to make a Senna video on like a tanky Senna build, which I still think is the best build for Senna, going the tanky route. And Seraphine is just easier to execute Lux in a sense of shielding. So Lux is mainly in that top tier because of her catch potential, but Seraphine is mainly here for her shielding, because Seraphine shields are actually insane, just that they're really underrated. And Zyra going for like support build, like Glacial, Rylai's, and things like that, really annoying to play against and really strong, just because your enemies just cannot run away, and a lot of utility as well. But of course, you can go for a full damage burst kind of version as well. So honestly, the rest of the tier list doesn't really change too much. Majority of engagers are still good in the A+ tier, but I think that at the moment, enchanters are generally better than engagers, and you see mainly an enchanter meta at the moment. So anyways, with all that, that was my tier list for patch 5.0. Of course, look forward to a lot of ADC guides coming up. And with all that said, thank you guys for watching the video, and goodbye.